and welcome to Ask the History Buff, the podcast that informs and educates about Canadian history. Hopefully, you will learn something and you'll be inspired to research some aspect of Canadian history because you heard it on Ask the History Buff. Each week, we explore the lives of influencers, of the events which they influenced, and the legacy which we as Canadians have inherited because of the influencer or because of the events that they influenced. I am Lynette, your curious Canadian history buff. I am not a degreed historian with letters behind my name, but I have researched more of a Christian history than most people have. I am always discovering new and interesting information about Canadian history, which really excites me. And that's why I call myself the Curious Canadian History Buff. I hope that you will be encouraged to Google people's names and events surrounding them like I do, so that you can understand their impact on our society. I encourage you also to follow the rabbit trails, which means that when you hear something or you read something on our website, you click on the people in the article just so that you can get a fuller picture of the influencers that we highlight. And for Christian listeners, I encourage you to be a Berean by searching out everything that you hear. And if you are just too busy to search, then ask the history buff. Chances are I may have answers that you are looking for. And if I don't, I will look up those issues and get back to you. So feel free to challenge my information anytime by sending your questions into info@christianrootscanada.org. And when you challenge me, I may learn something. You may teach me something. And when you listen to this podcast, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button to be informed when another podcast is here. And if you know someone who would like to hear this podcast or would learn something from this podcast, well, then hit the like and share button also. Today, we will explore the life of John Norton, who was a native, a Christian, a warrior, a teacher, and a diplomat. And this episode is to remember this day of truth and reconciliation. Today we are looking at John Norton, and his native name was Teonin Hukarawen. That's Teonin Hukarawen. John Norton was the son of a Cherokee father who was captured by the British when they burnt his village of Kuwaki. Kuwaki, that's the name of the village. His father was taken to Scotland and raised as a Norton. His mother was Scottish and her maiden name was Anderson. It is suggested that he was born around 1770 and he was raised near Dunfermline. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Dunfermline, the place that he returned to with his wife and son in 1815. He even enrolled them in school there. while he was in Britain. He died around 1825. He was very articulate in speaking and writing English. That reflected the product of a good education, a good British education, probably in Dunfermline. In 1784, he enlisted as a soldier in the British Army with the 65th Foot at Mullingar in Ireland. In 1785, his army was in Lower Canada, which was Quebec, which was dispatched to Fort Niagara near Youngstown in New York. In 1787, he deserted the army, obtaining his discharge in 1788. In Canada, he became a schoolmaster, an interpreter for the Indian Department, a Mohawk chief, and an author. Between 1791 and 1795, he became engaged in the fur trade of the Northwest under the fur trader John Askin of Detroit. However, in 1794, he had become an interpreter to the Indian Department in Niagara. Soon, he was adopted by Joseph Brant as his nephew and an interpreter in Joseph Brant's service. He became also an emissary and a deputy and successor to Joseph Brant. This prompted Norton to resign from the Indian Department. He began living on the Grand River at Onondaga. Today, Onondaga is part of the largest Six Nations reserve in Canada, the only reserve in North America where all Six Nations live together. In 1799, Norton was appointed as Teonin Hokarawan, which is a position that allowed him to act as chieftain for diplomacy and leadership during the war. Just like Joseph Brant's position, it gave him a strong but challenging position to liaise between the chiefs and the Indian Department. He saw his main role as defending the Six Nations' interests. Not all chiefs were on board with that. Some rejected him and were in active opposition to his representing the Grand River natives. In the early 1800s, both Brant and Norton, on behalf of the Six Nations, revived claims for deeds to the Grand River lands. Based on Brant's understanding of the agreement made with the British for settling loyalist natives on the Grand River, and that was because of the War of the American Independence, Brant understood that the natives had inherited free and certified ownership of the lands. As a result, they were free to sell off portions to white settlers. The Indian Department in Niagara did not agree. So Brant decided to go above their heads, appealing to the Privy Council in Britain. He sent Norton as his emissary, but the Indian Department thwarted their plans. They sent information ahead of Norton getting there. Now, Norton had another reason why he was so eager to go to England. The British had declared war on France, and he wanted to enlist again in the British Army. From 1804 to 1806, Norton's trip to England was a providential and personal triumph. In 1804, leaders in the evangelical missionary movement had founded the British and Foreign Bible Society. They were famously known as the Clapham Sect. This group included parliamentarians and philanthropists who were engaged in the fight for the abolition of the slave trade and the expansion of Christian missions. Well-known personalities such as William Allen and Robert Barclay of the Society of Friends became his closest friends. Now, this was the group that William Wilberforce belonged to. They recognized his character and his potential, and before long, they converted him to their cause, employing him as a translator. The very first use of the Bible Society funds was for the project of printing a portion of the scriptures in a foreign language, the translation of the Gospel of John into the Mohawk language. 2,000 copies were printed in English and Mohawk, of which 500 copies were given to Norton for distribution in the Canadas. He returned to Canada in style. High-ranking officers in the Navy arranged his passage on a Royal Navy frigate. He was optimistic about his future. It was an honor to be engaged in missionary work and to engage in correspondence with his new friends in the Bible Society, the Englishmen of renown like Reverend John Owen and the Duke of Northumberland, who was Joseph Brant's friend. He was optimistic about being an agent of change in the Grand River community. He had great plans for the improvement of the community in the areas of education and religion, morality, the exercise of sobriety, the development of agriculture, and as a result, development of industry. He was also discouraged that he had failed to accomplish the mission given to him by Joseph Brant, the acquisition of land deeds for the natives living on the Grand River Reserve. He returned to the Grand River and found conditions even more depressing, especially since Brant's health was failing and his son, John Hogan, was still a very young man. His position as Teonin Hokarawan, a position which allowed him to act as chieftain for diplomacy and leadership during war and to liaise between the chiefs and the Indian departments, well, that position was even more challenging. Because of his association with men of renown in Britain and his loyalty to Britain, he was judged by the natives of the Six Nations Reserve as treacherous. He was judged as being disloyal to the natives and acting out of privilege. He just was not trusted by his detractors. From his return to Canada in 1806 until 1809, his efforts to perform his role met with constant opposition. His idealism was questioned because they saw it as hypocrisy, and his pursuit of the position which Brant articulated about land ownership was seen by some as an expression of greed. His efforts were also thwarted by the Indian Department agent Klaus, the lieutenant governor, who was Gore, and some of the civil chiefs on the council. As the opposition and personal attacks on him increased, he dispensed with humanitarian projects and wished to retire from the position. In April 1809 to June 1810, he left the Grand River on a journey of discovery. He wanted to find his father's family among the Cherokee and re-establish ties with them. He traveled through Ohio and Kentucky to Tennessee, the land of the Cherokees. He was warmly received as a Cherokee and got input into his situation on the Grand River, and he was encouraged to examine the situation from different perspectives. On his return, he was again discouraged by conditions on the Grand River and planned to leave again, this time to go out west. About this time, he met Tenskawatawa and Tecumseh. When rumblings were heard about a potential war with the US, he stayed. He had planned to write a journal of his journey south, and I have a copy of that one, but that was put on hold also until after the War of 1812. During the first year of the War of 1812, he recruited fighting men from the Six Nations and other native tribes, and he was their commander. These groups fought along the Niagara front and varied in size based on the needs and the fighting conditions. The pinnacle of his leadership and military career was the great victory at Queenston Heights. He made the tactical decision to have his men climb the Niagara Escarpment at a much easier location, further away from Queenston Heights than Major General Brock did. General Brock had chosen a steeper cliff close to the Niagara River, which resulted with him dying at Queenston Heights. Norton's choice of cover in the woods to the right flank of the westward moving American force allowed his army hamper their advance. This allowed time for the arrival of Major General Roger Sheaffe and his troops, who routed the Americans, resulting in their retreat. This also allowed time for reinforcements from the Chippewa to arrive. Sheaffe was full of praise for Norton in his dispatches to Britain. He praised the judicious position which Norton and the Indians with him had taken. Norton's early training in the British Army with the 65th Foot at Mullingar in Ireland in 1784 had borne fruit. Norton was honored a week later by Major General Sheaffe, who appointed him as Captain of the Confederate Indians, which was a rank also held by Joseph Brant during the War of American Independence. Norton got recognition and accolades for himself and his troops by the governor in chief. At that time, that was like the governor general in Canada, and the governor in chief of British North America, Sir George Prevost. He was congratulated for his courage and perseverance and was encouraged to maintain and increase his formidable and capable force. In May 1813, Norton and his force were active again when the Americans invaded Fort George, which is on Niagara on the Lake, participating in the British withdrawal to Burlington Heights, which is now Hamilton. In June 1813, Norton and some warriors repelled the Americans at Stony Creek, pursuing the fleeing enemy. For the remainder of the summer, he participated in many skirmishes, sorry, against the enemy. In June 1813, at about age 43, he also married a young, attractive, and talented 16-year-old Delaware woman named Carrigaqua, and her English name was Catherine. Norton was previously married to an Iroquois woman with whom he had at least one son. The officiating minister was Reverend Robert Addison, the Anglican clergy for the Niagara region, Niagara on the Lake, from 1792 to 1818. That was his period of service to Niagara on the Lake. Part of his responsibility was to minister to the natives of the Grand River. He often visited the reserve, and he actually visited the reserve twice a year with Joseph Brant and John Norton acting as his interpreters because he did not learn the Mohawk language. Because of the war, Norton's prominence and recognition as a leader by the senior British representatives of the Crown, like the Governor in Chief of British North America, Sir George Prevost, Major General Roger Sheaffe, and then Major General Francis de Rottenberg. Well, because of his rubbing shoulders with those prominent people, that meant that the Indian Department held very little authority over him. Major General Francis de Rottenberg suggested that Norton be given discretionary control over dispensing presents to those who served with him in the War of 1812. He also noted that his efforts at reconciliation, that is, Major General Francis de Rottenberg, his efforts at reconciliation between Norton and the head of the Indian Department, Mr. Clowes, he said that was in vain. However, he was concerned that Norton's control of the warrior natives could create problems if he was not supported. In 1814, Norton was summoned by the Governor-in-Chief of British North America, Sir George Prevost, to consult with him on native support. There, he was officially confirmed as captain of the Confederate Indians. In July, he was appointed as a leader of 200 Iroquois at the Battle of Chippewa. At that battle, they suffered their greatest casualty losses, prompting the American Iroquois leader, Red Jacket, to strongly suggest that all Iroquois on both sides should withdraw from the war. Norton refused to withdraw, and his generosity with presents encouraged a few Iroquois to stay with him, and some from other nations joined him, including a guy called the Prophet, Tenskwatawa. He continued leading the remaining troops at the Battle of Lundy's Lane in July and in the British assault on Fort Erie in August. In December, after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, Norton retired from fighting, receiving an annual pension of £200, and however, he continued fighting for the cause of Indian war veterans for the losses they incurred during the war. Eventually, Indian Department officers were instructed not to interfere with Norton's dealings with the natives on the Grand River. At last, he had proven himself as a leader. So he took his wife, Catherine, and one of his sons, John Tehonakara, to Britain, where they were both enrolled in a school in Dunfermline in Scotland. Catherine was befriended by the Duchess of Northumberland, who arranged to have Catherine's portrait painted by an Edinburgh artist. Norton spent his time with the men of the Bible Society, with Berkeley and Owen and the Duke of Northumberland. He committed the manuscript of his very detailed journey to Cherokee country, the life of the Iroquois in North America, and his eyewitness accounts of the War of 1812 to these men, Berkeley, Owen, and the Duke of Northumberland. While he was still in Britain, he was promoted to the official rank of Colonel Norton as a result of a commission as a brevet major in the British Army. This title was one of recognition for his service, but it did not come with any monetary reward. On his return to Upper Canada, he bought a large farm overlooking the Sims Locks. He sought to lead by example at the Grand River natives, to the Grand River natives by improving his land through agriculture. He also worked with Reverend Robert Addison, translating the Gospel of Matthew into Mohawk. So that's the Gospel of John, first with the Bible Society, and now with the Gospel of Matthew into Mohawk. He had an assistant called Henry Aaron Hill, and he apparently translated the other Gospels into Mohawk. He was worried about the debt he was incurring because of the enterprise he had undertaken in agriculture, and he considered taking a trip to Cherokee country again. However, life took a different turn in 1823. Now, Norton had a young Indian called Big Arrow. His name was Joe Crawford, his English name. And Big Arrow was working for him on the farm. He suspected Catherine had committed adultery with Joe and ordered Joe off the farm. Well, Joe challenged him to a duel in which he sustained injury in the scuffle and he died. Norton was charged with murder and offered to stand trial. In an effort to protect Catherine from public shame, he refused to use the excuse of self-defense as his argument. He was convicted of manslaughter and he was fined £25. Catherine asked forgiveness in a letter, but he refused to see her again. Instead, he settled his share of his pension upon her and left for Arkansas. He was never heard from again. So that's the story of John Norton, with his native name was Teonin Hokarawan. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and this episode is brought to you in memory of the Truth and Reconciliation Day, today, September 30th. And we hope you would join us for another podcast. Don't forget to share and subscribe. And if you want to learn anything more about Christian Roots Canada, please go to our website, www.christianrootscanada.org. There are lots of information, good information there for you. So see you next time, and bye for now.